Welcome back, Dr. Seager. So excited to be visiting with you again. The man that got me into cold plunging. I don't know if I want to thank you or cuss you a little bit on that one because
You can do
it's
both.
an important it both
You'll
during
cuss me when
during
you
your
get
getting
in, and then
cussed.
you'll thank me when you get out.
That's right. That's right. That's right. But one thing that you recently did was had a conversation with Dr. Richard Fry, who is a MD, PhD in biophysics, which I thought was absolutely fascinating and perfect to go into this conversation. And so, tied in a lot of the autism spectrum, and I didn't realize this was a controversial subject. I'm learning, I'm learning more and more about what I didn't believe was controversial, like raw milk or ivermectin. Mel Gibson obviously is super. I almost lost the YouTube channel over him. So the autism has become very controversial, and I think that's just ridiculous. Honestly, I think that we do need to know what causes it, and I don't think we need to be worried about feelings. We need to worry about what is really going on. And so the one thing that we also connected on was our baby's going through something, right? You type 1 diabetes with your son, mine stage 4 cancer. And we need to reflect on what got them there, right? It wasn't their fault. The parents have a lot of responsibility in this conversation. So, with all that saying, how are you, my friend? How are you doing?
It's been a lot of attention directed on autism, but not really at me. This is coming from Kennedy. This is coming from Jay Bhattacharya. And this is coming from people who have legitimate concerns, like Del Bigtree, about the association between vaccination and autism. Jay testified in his confirmation hearing that he did not think that vaccines cause autism. And I know Jay pretty well because we got to be friends during the COVID lockdowns. And at the time he testified that, I'm like, I don't know, man. I've gotten to know a lot of parents, and they tell me the same story. My child was fine. My child was meeting all the neurological developmental milestones. And then my child had an adverse reaction to a vaccine, and my child regressed, became nonverbal, started stimming, even had seizures. These are serious consequences. Del Bigtree's producer, Patrick Layton, is one of those people. And when Patrick and I were talking about, this is in the middle of the COVID lockdowns, and Patrick was saying, will you come on our show? Will you talk about, the response and healthcare and what the lockdowns are doing? I said, I will, but you got to tell me why you're so anti-vax. Like at the time, I wasn't paying attention, but Patrick told me exactly that experience. He said he had 2 vaccine injured sons. And it doesn't matter what peer reviewed, double blind, controlled trial you're going to run. His experience was his sons were fine. They got vaccinated, they were injured, and now they have autism. That's super powerful. It changed everything about the way I do science. So I wrote it in my book, right in the introduction, where I said, look, nothing matters more than your N=1 experience. I don't care what the trials say. When I started posting about what happened to my testosterone, these Twitter doctors, came out of the woodwork and said, there's no study that says what happened to you actually happened to you. They were denying my experience. And so Patrick changed my thinking about this. And when Jay was like, I don't think vaccines cause autism, I was thinking, Jay, it doesn't explain what these parents whom I care about, whom I know personally, are telling me. So I just kind of filed that away. I thought maybe Jay and I are going to disagree. And then Chris Palmer, whom I don't know personally, but he's a Harvard psychiatrist. He wrote a book called Brain Energy, and he's all about the metabolism and its relationship to the brain and mental health. He put out a tweet, and it was a review article from 2024 in Nature. And he said, hey, you might not be paying attention, but here's this thing that links autism to mitochondria. Logan, I'm a mitochondria guy, so I got to read this paper. It's remarkable. The mitochondrial theory of the origins of autism, it goes back to at least the mid-90s. And the more I looked, the more this name, Richard E. Fry, started coming up. He's at Phoenix Children's Hospital. I can talk to this guy. So I spent more time preparing for that interview than any other, interview I've ever done. I read almost every paper he's published. I didn't have time to read his book, but I read all of this science. I read what he was citing. I read the people who were citing him. So when I would go in there, I could talk like halfway smart enough about what's going on. And something happened along the way, which was this insight. Now, 80% of the kids who are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder between the ages of 2 and 5 had blood markers that are associated with mitochondrial dysfunction. So there is a very high association between mitochondrial impairment and autism. But what about the other 20%? Logan, you can't say, this causes this until you have a mechanistic understanding of how that works, not just a correlation. And if these other 20% don't have any blood markers of any metabolic dysfunction associated with the mitochondria, then how can we say mitochondrial dysfunction causes autism, which is the whole theory? Here's what hit me. When my son was diagnosed with diabetes, he was 6 years old. I didn't know why. He had a fever, and the fever never went away. He never got better. Kids get sick, it was December. We're living in way northern New York. And after a couple, 3 days, they get over it, but he didn't get over it. We wound up taking him to the emergency room. He was admitted straight into pediatric ICU. They put him on an insulin drip, and it was like watching him come back to life. And I felt such shame because I didn't know what was wrong with my kid, and I'm supposed to protect him and take care of him. I'm still not over it. Yeah. So I got to take him to the dentist. This is couple 3 years later, and he's got to get like his mouth expanded or some messed up thing. And Reader's Digest is still in the dentist office. Like, this is broadband internet is just becoming a thing, right? But I'm sitting there reading the magazines, and Reader's Digest is there, and there's an article about a Finnish study on type 1 diabetes. It took them almost 30 years to complete this study, and it discovered the cause of type 1 diabetes. It's a vitamin D deficiency during the development of the immune system. So we're talking during the first year of life, in infancy. And even if you restore vitamin D levels in the bloodstream after the child's immune system is developed, it's healthier for them. But because that developmental stage in their first year of life is so critical, if it doesn't have enough vitamin D there is an irrevocable change, atypical development of the immune system that makes them vulnerable to type 1 diabetes. And what initiates the onset of type 1 diabetes? An immunological event like a fever. I felt like an idiot because I obviously didn't take care of my child when now this is a dad talking. I'm not saying that this makes sense, but this is just a dad's like feelings of guilt coming through. I didn't take care of my child when he was 1, and his diabetes may have been inevitable if his immune system didn't develop in a healthy, typical way. The reason that some children who do not have the mitochondrial markers of dysfunction but do have autism is because there is a critical phase of brain development. Just like there's a critical phase of immune system development, there's a critical phase of brain development. And it's during especially late stage pregnancy in the first 3 years of life, where the brain is growing and developing, building new capacities. If your mitochondria are incapable of supplying the energy, the power to steer this neurological development during that critical stage, then your brain is predisposed to autism. And what is the onset of that? A fever, an immunological event that causes inflammation in the brain and that initiates the onset of what the brain has already been predisposed to. And I should caution you, Logan, this analogy, it does not exist anywhere in the literature. Dr. Fry doesn't talk about it. Nobody with any expertise in autism is saying this. I'm the one putting this out there, and I'm saying it's an analogy. That makes it a hypothesis. The reason not every child has these markers of mitochondrial dysfunction is because it is during this critical phase of neurological development when a deficit in the mitochondria results in an atypical trajectory that predisposes the brain to autism that will be revealed later when there's an immunological event. It's a very powerful hypothesis. It has yet to be investigated. And it means, if this hypothesis is correct, Jay's right. Vaccines don't cause autism. Vaccines initiate a fever. Sometimes you can have an adverse vaccine reaction that causes this immunological event that initiates the onset of autism. But if it weren't the vaccine, it could be the flu, it could be some other infection, it could be any inflammatory event that tips the balance in the brain towards, which is already developed in this atypical fashion, towards this neurological disorder that we call autism. So what do we do about it? There are two things. The first one is you got to take care of the pregnant women. Every single pregnancy condition associated with metabolic distress. So what am I talking about? Gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, placental insufficiency, insulin resistance during pregnancy that results in hyperinsulinemia. These conditions are all associated with about a 4-fold increase in the risk of autism in the child later. When there is a mitochondrial impairment in the pregnant mother, the child's brain will not develop along these typical healthy pathways. It will take an alternative pathway. So you've got to take care of the pregnant women. You have to get them metabolically, mitochondria healthy during their pregnancy. Okay. Take care of the kids. Again, take care of their mitochondria. What does that mean? Even after a diagnosis of ASD, giving them magnesium, giving them L-carnitine, giving them CoQ10, giving them the things that will support their mitochondria can help alleviate the symptoms of autism spectrum disorder. For Dr. Fry, he's particularly interested in folate metabolism. Folate is critical to mitochondrial function. And so he's used a prescription strength folate. It's actually used for chemotherapy patients. It's supposed to alleviate some of the side effects of chemotherapy, but he's repurposed this and said, we can fix their folate metabolism when we use this drug. And now it's escaping me, leucovorin. He prescribes that, and he has over time taken children who are diagnosed with ASD because they meet all these diagnostic criteria, improve their markers to the point where they no longer meet the diagnostic criteria. They're graduating from mainstream high schools. They're holding jobs. They consider themselves cured of autism, no matter what, the medical profession would say. These metabolic interventions, when there is neuroplasticity remaining, and there's always a little bit of neuroplasticity, but the younger you are, the more you have. Fixing the mitochondria can help treat the disorder that is autism. This is a goddamn revolution in the way we think about it. And Richard Fry says to me that I've never heard of it before because nobody believes him. He's been working on this for 20 years. Right. But people aren't really listening. So I'm like, okay, we're going to put out a podcast. I have a tiny little audience, but I'm going to tell them what you're telling me. I'm going to tell them why, what are the mechanisms by which this works. I will share my hypothesis about type 1 diabetes and the immune system and the analogy with the brain and the neurological system. And then we're going to go one better. We're going to start asking parents if their autistic child has ever cold plunged. And Logan, I'm starting to get messages from parents that say, my kid loves the water. My kid is in the swimming pool all winter long. I see my nonverbal child with his teeth chattering and he's got his life jacket on. He's playing in the water all day. He doesn't want to get out. There's something. We know that cold plunge supports mitobiogenesis, supports mitochondrial health. There's something about the experience of the autistic child in the cold water that gives them some relief from the anxieties or from the edge on the nervous system. Something. I've talked to one parent yesterday who said that her child was self-aware enough to know that he carried on conversations better, that he was sharper, he was more fluent for the day that he did his cold plunge and the day after. And that's why he asked his mom if they could keep doing it. That kid is now an air traffic controller for the Marines. Talk about high functioning. He's in the perfect job for him, you know? So we got to go a little bit deeper into this relationship. We got to hear from more people, and we have to investigate it in a systematic way. If we add cold plunge with the nutritional support for the mitochondria, do we see a reliable improvement in the symptoms of autism spectrum disorder? That's a researchable question.
So I think this is why you're the perfect person, and I think this is the perfect setup for the conversation, right? Because you have a very unique, uh, what I refer to as lattice work of mental models that kind of come together, and you can see things through that lens. So, for me, Lander was diagnosed stage 4 cancer when he was 5. Right. We had a documented pediatrician vaccine reaction where it shut off his bile when he was about 18 months old from the MMR DTaP. I don't remember which one it was. So fast forward, we know what happened. Right. And so years of going through this, I went down the nutrition rabbit trail. I wanted to know what the cancer diet was. What oncologists were telling me made no sense, and just kept learning and kept learning, and it led me to Jack Cruz, right? And so I asked Jack the very first time we had a conversation, I said, what do I do for my son? And he said, well, you keep him off screens and you get a tan on his back. And I thought,
Yeah.
what the hell are you talking about? Right? Like, so I have spent the last few years trying to understand what he was talking about. And that led me to um, where we are right now. And I think we're about to add another layer that is going to blow this whole thing wide open. I really do. I think we're there. The reason that you don't see that linear cause and effect is because everything is a probability, right? And so we can all be experienced. You talked about the N of one, right? Everything that we experience can manifest in a different way. And I think Doug Wallace has laid this out perfectly, which ties back into the autism on heteroplasmy, right? And the mitochondrial connection to autism. I think Doug's probably the number one that's laid that out. We have certain, for lack of a better way of describing, zip codes of redox throughout the body, right? And wherever there is a redox problem, that's where that disease manifests, whether it's type 1 diabetes, whether that's kidney cancer, whether that's autism, whatever it is a mitochondrial, but it's based on probability and not cause and effect. And that's really hard
Mhm.
to digest, right? With that, this is where I wanted to break in the Dr. Fry conversation, because we didn't talk about light, right? And we didn't talk about how light governs biology. We didn't talk about melanin, which is exactly what we need to be discussing on with this entire conversation. Light or cold produces biophotons. I mean, that's what it does. Light produces brown fat, right? Cold. Light produces brown fat. This is melanin, right? We increase melanin, that is the controller of all the magnetochemistry of the human body. So, as you developed my green lamp and you're looking into the green light spectrums, that ties in. The sunlight ties in. The palm C ties in. So, one thing that I do want to throw off before I want you to give me your kickback on what I'm saying is folate and folic acid have a absorption emission spectrum. Like folic acid tops out at 280. Folate is 290 to 300. It's
Hmm.
extremely important when we take into like what Roland Van Wyck said about life sculpting life, right? And how that
Hmm.
is. That little bit of an absorption and emission spectrum difference is going to make different metabolism, right? This is why we have beta
That's
oxidation,
actually a big
glycolysis,
difference.
PPP, right?
Yeah.
Huge difference. Huge difference. And we don't talk about it like that. Through the MTHFR lens, we talk about, well, you're gumming up the folate receptors. You're doing this with methylation, right? And that's a part of it, but the light piece is right there. It's literally right there. Folate is a chromophore for this entire AMO physics that's going on in the body. This is why I think Dr. Fry and you have a follow up where we lay in this piece and it breaks it right open, right? I think he is the
What a good
perfect
idea.
person with a PhD in biophysics to see
Yep.
this. So, what I am saying, what I'm hypothesizing, right? Because we got a double hypothesis going here, is that when you look at autistic children, right, I have noticed most are very pale. Most are utilizing screens. We have a lack of melanin. We have blue lights in the face. This is a coping mechanism, right? This goes straight into the dopamine. Melanin is degraded into L-dopa and dopamine. You get a dopamine hit, right, with the blue lights, right behind our pituitary. Our eyes are right in front of the pituitary. It's all the pregnenolone still syndrome, right? All of the secretory hormones right there that we're destroying. So this is why we have such a wide range of problems there. But to me, it is what you're doing coupled with light therapy and getting a tan is going to be an absolute game changer for people. And this is why folate is part of that.
Okay, there's a lot, and we should go through it slowly. The first thing that comes to mind is I've talked to a number of people who advance different theories of what causes autism, and some people have their favorites. One of these is acetaminophen causes autism. Now, acetaminophen is not good for your child. It's not good for
No.
your infant. The younger they are, the worse, the more toxic acetaminophen is. So I'm not defending acetaminophen. But the only reason that a parent gives a child acetaminophen is because they have a fever. It's like saying the cast causes the broken bone because all the children with broken bones have casts, but they're getting the order wrong. First, the fever that creates the inflammation that initiates the onset of autism. And of course, that's associated with acetaminophen. There's also an association between ibuprofen and for the same reason, because ibuprofen is responsive to a fever. It's the fever that initiates the autism. Okay, what about heavy metals toxicity? Heavy metals toxicity act through the mitochondria. Well, maybe it's the microplastics. Microplastics act through the mitochondria, but it must be the mold toxicity that causes autism. Mold toxicity acts through the mitochondria. The mitochondrial theory of the origins of autism is the only one that provides a mechanistic explanation for all of these other multifactorial causes. Somebody says, well, no, autism is genetic. It is the mitochondria that control gene expression because they modify the epigenetic landscape. It is the mitochondria that signals the genes to turn on or off. You may have a gene that makes you at greater risk to autism, but that doesn't mean that the gene is expressed until it is signaled by the mitochondria who are responding to the environment to express it. Now we got to talk about light. Some people will say non-native EMFs cause autism, but through what mechanism are they acting? Through the mitochondria, because the mitochondria, as you said, they are receptors for this radioactive spectrum. And when you mess up your mitochondria, and this could be mess up your sleep cycle, mitochondria make their own melatonin, and they need that melatonin to protect their DNA, because mitochondria have their own DNA, from the damage of reactive oxygen species. When you mess up your sleep cycle, you leave your mitochondria vulnerable. When you mess up your light hygiene, you leave your mitochondria vulnerable. And so it is fair to say that all of these things cause autism, but
Yeah.
they do it through the same mechanism of mitochondrial impairment. Your mitochondria can actually take a lot of abuse. A little bit of reactive oxygen species is a hormetic stressor that will stimulate mitobiogenesis. And so a little bit of heavy metals, a little bit of microplastics, a little bit of non-native EMFs, light pollution. Your mitochondria can handle all of these insults, especially when your diet is on point and other things are going well in your life or in the child's life. But when the total load on the mitochondria results in impairment, the body has lost its resilience to all of these variety of insults. That is, they add up to one another. Because they all act through the same mechanism, they all inflict accumulative damage. In this sense, everyone's theory of autism is correct, and everyone's theory of autism is incomplete. And the remedy is the same. Take care of your mitochondria. Now, as far as Jack and the light, you need dark. You need feast, you need fasting. You need hot, you need cold. We need to embed our bodies in the natural environment for which our bodies are designed. And why that's foreign to people is really frustrating. The idea that somehow the sunlight is toxic, but the sunscreen is good for us is so foreign to all of our intuitions. And that's because it's wrong, which leads me back to my own experience as a father. When my son was born, it was late October. We were living in northern New York. We lived up on a mountain and it was cold. And I remember there was this brilliant, high pressure, sunny winter day. I don't know if you have them where you are, but it's one of those where it's single digit temperatures, maybe 10 degrees Fahrenheit, and the air is still and the sun is shining. And I remember thinking I should go outside with my son. I should put him on my chest. I should let this sunshine come in and we should enjoy this together. And Logan, something stopped me. Some little voice in my head that said, oh no, it's too cold outside for your kid. And I thought, yeah, but what about vitamin D? And then that other voice said, you know what? There is no UVB radiation at this time of year at the latitude you live. I didn't go outside. And I still regret that. Because what I did not know is that when you activate the brown fat in an infant, and infants have lots of brown fat, they are very well defended against the cold. If I had gone outside and activated that brown fat, the mitochondria that are doing the non-shivering cold thermogenesis, that are do this whole electron transport chain of redox reactions that produces heat, it also produces light inside the body. And it's particularly important for an infant because they have so much brown fat. That's a lot of light inside the cells. When a certain wavelength of that light intersects the cholesterol molecule, it will produce pre-vitamin D inside the fat cells of my son. Well, where does vitamin D get stored? Inside fat cells. That vitamin D will never show up in his bloodstream because it doesn't have to. When you're out in the sunshine and the pre-vitamin D and all the metabolism of vitamin D is taking place in the skin, it has to travel through the bloodstream to reach the fat cells where it's going to be stored. But when you make it inside the fat cell, it never shows up in the bloodstream. Don't go to the Inuit and do, blood serum samples for 25-OHD or whatever it is you're going to find and say, there's no vitamin D, so they must be deficient. The vitamin D is already where it needs to be, stored in the fat cells, and it was produced by the biophotons that are the reaction to cold. Now I know all these things. It's no consolation because there is no way to reverse type 1 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes, entirely reversible, but type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disorder in which the immune system has attacked the cells inside the pancreas that produce insulin, and those cells aren't coming back. In a way, type 1 diabetes is a breeze. I measure his blood sugar, I monitor his diet and his exercise, I inject him with insulin. It's no big deal. It's not stage 4 cancer. It's not profound autism. In a way, it's no big deal. And it's also irreversible. Autism is not like that. Autism can be improved. And there are people on Twitter telling me now there's no cure. And all I can tell them is that the parents and the children who say they've been cured disagree.
Right.
We can treat the children that have autism and see improvement in their function because neuroplasticity still exists and is the mitochondria that fuel that repair of the neurological systems.
Yeah, I think, first, I think I still hold out hope that we can reverse type 1 diabetes. So I'll just throw that out there. I think that we're learning more every day, right? And I feel like every time I have some sort of a breakthrough, I realize how much we don't know, right? Like every time, it's like, wow, we don't know anything. So I hold out hope, and the reason that I say that is one thing that I like for some reason nobody realizes is what Robert O'Becker found with red blood cells, right? Under 1 trillionth of an amp, they de-differentiate into stem cells.
I had no
Like
idea.
that should break the internet, right? Like that should be
Yep.
absolutely something that a non-nucleated, non-mitochondrial containing cell de-differentiates into a stem cell. That should
Wow.
just break. the internet.
Yeah.
The other thing is you talked about we've got to take care of pregnant women, right? When you look at a womb, that is an infrared bath. What does mitochondria love? Why does red light therapy gain so much popularity? Why? Because it is crucial to life, right? And this is why there's still no alternative for the sun, right? Like there's still no, we cannot mimic. Like I have a sky portal right now, right? Like I use Chroma. I love them. I think they're phenomenal. I've got your green light lamp. We have all the things that man is attempting to do, but it still doesn't come close to what nature provides, what God designed,
Right.
the way that I look at it. So we don't have the appropriate light environment for the woman, therefore the baby can't have the appropriate light environment, right? And so and that goes into the different chromophores. Magnesium, I mean, this is the core of chlorophyll is magnesium for a reason, right? Like it is a light absorber, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when you start piecing all this together, this is why this is why, I've told you before, I think Jack has the biggest picture of anybody, and it's because he has tied such wide-ranging things together. And when we look at Dr. Fry, I think what he's done is brilliant, but I think he's like you, he's on a upper story, right? And we still have deeper to go. And I think that you
Yes, we
said
do.
that a little differently than I did, but I think the light piece is so important. I think cold is coupled to that. And when we talk about vitamin D, that same little purple band of light produces nitric oxide and melanin too, right? That's a important one that we hide from, right? And it is crucial to life. So we have to just continue piecing this together and have protocols and have those stories, because uh, Einstein didn't have a reference paper in the photoelectric effect. Changed the world.
When we share our experiences online with one another, or in conversations like this, a lot of the medical institutions, or the institutions that guard science, will dismiss the knowledge that comes from experience. They'll say, well, that's anecdotal. But when we share them among ourselves, like human beings have been doing for 150,000 years, we accumulate new hypotheses. Now, those should be subjected to systematic investigation. Anecdotes are a wonderful way of developing new ideas about what to try, in myself. This is where the whole green light thing came from. I was looking at vitamin D. I wanted a safer tanning lamp because tanning beds are dangerous, not because there's anything dangerous about getting a tan, but because they strip out all the wavelengths of sunlight that protect your skin against damage. They give you the UVB and A without giving you the infrared and near infrared. And that's terrible. So I wanted, but Google figured out I'm doing this research on light. And Google sent me an email saying, hey, you should probably read this paper. And it was about green light. And it said, green light alleviates migraine pain. Oh, that's kind of cool. So I called up Mito Red Light. They're in Scottsdale. I said, could you make me, just give me one of your red lights, one of these little portable jobs, but I want you to put the green in it instead of, there's like, sure, we can do whatever you want. They sent it over. He turns it on and he says, it's garbage. It's way too bright. It'll give you a headache if you didn't have one. And I was kind of disappointed, but I thought I got to see this for myself. So I went out there with a friend. She gets migraines fairly often. She had a little bit of a headache because we're sitting there in their light with their fluorescent office space, terrible. She took the thing out of my hand and I was all disappointed. And she said, let me see that. She put it right up against her face like this with her eyes closed, Logan. And she said, this feels really good. We had just invented the world's most powerful green phototherapy pain relief device, and it was kind of an accident. If we don't share these experiences, if we don't try things and say, well, this is what worked for me, well, this is what worked for me, how are we ever going to come up with anything? How are we ever going to structure a reasonable, systematic clinical trial? So we put it out on the market. And as people write back to me and say, well, this works or this didn't work, we discover more knowledge to share. We find increasingly reliable guidance. We say, you can recreate this effect. Here's what I think is going on. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, It's the hottest, city in North America. I can't get to the Pacific Ocean. I can't get to the lakes. It's a 2-hour drive up to Payson if I want to get into the mountain stream. So I have a Morosco. It's right out on my porch. You can see my daughter with her friend. They're
Yes.
going to get into it this morning because we like doing it in the morning when the dawn is shining on the ice bath. Morosco is the next best thing to nature. Nature's the best, but we can use technology to kind of reconnect us because we live such disconnected lives.
Yeah.
Well, if I want to do forest bathing, again, I got to drive like a couple of hours. There's no forest in Phoenix, Arizona. But if I'm not able to drive, then I got my green light. I got my infrared light. The dominant wavelengths of light in the forest are near infrared and green. If you can't forest bathe, then you bring the technology of the forest to you. It's the next best thing to nature. I'm not about to go, live on the beach or in a cave. I love my job teaching at Arizona State University. I live here for a reason. I'm an engineer and I embrace technology, but the technology is making us sick by disconnecting us from the environment and the stimulus that our bodies really need. So now I'm using
Absolutely.
technology to recreate that connection. The Morosco is grounded. You get in there and you are instantly connected with the electrons in the earth. This improves your circulation by changing the zeta potential of your blood cells, causing them to disaggregate and reduce the viscosity of your blood. People have no idea what's really happening inside them. They just know they don't feel good.
Yeah, and unfortunately, nobody really understands the zeta potential. So when you go down that rabbit trail, you look like a wackadoodle. Trust me, I just got into an argument with a nurse on this topic. One thing I want to go back a little bit. One thing in health that we do not talk about enough that I think is possibly even the most important is timing. Time. I think this is a big deal. So when you reference the tanning bed, what I think is even uh, more detrimental is the timing at which we use a technology that has issues anyways, right? So let's say hypothetically, you go to work, you spend all day inside under these garbage lights, you get off work, you get the kids taken care of, then you want to run down to the gym and do a tan, right? That timing is as problematic as it is the lack of infrared. And so I
Agreed.
think that this is something that we're going to have a really important nuanced conversation with that. And vitamin D should not be a stagnant level, right? Like the
Exactly right.
that's insanity to have that
Yep.
humans need 80 micromole, right? Like based on what? Like where they are, what
Right.
time of year it is. I
Right.
mean, there's so much to it. So I, I I agree. I think technology is it's a bridge, right? But like we know, you live on the ground, not in a geopathic stress zone that is a desert, that you would be better, right? Like you know that. And so I get it. I get what you're saying. I agree with you. I think this conversation, if people really take away some of those nuggets and put it together, has really, really large implications.
Agreed. What we are seeing now is we might have an incredible opportunity. We are at an inflection point in attitudes towards health. And I think it's probably the COVID lockdowns that brought us here because
Absolutely.
people no longer trust the institutions of public health. They still might like their doctor. They feel like, my doctor's a good guy or something like that, but they have no trust in the institutions. That includes the universities, by the way. The people are discovering how corrupt the funding mechanisms are, how bad the research that's coming out of the universities. And another thing that Jay Bhattacharya said during his Senate confirmation hearing is that the amyloid plaque hypothesis of Alzheimer's, that the NIH has poured tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars into investigating, is all based upon image doctored fraud. The Lancet is like taking down the papers that they published that were supposedly peer reviewed for that all had fake images of supposedly rat brains with amyloid plaques in them. Nobody trusts what's coming out of these official institutions. So what do? They go online They go to WebMD, or they go to Cleveland Clinic, or they go to Mayo Clinic, or whatever. And that information is difficult to trust too. So we have this crisis, which is also an opportunity, in which people for the first time are really open to the idea that maybe there's something else out there. Maybe there's something more. The problem is, I only understand maybe 30% of what Jack Kruse says. He's really difficult to comprehend. He talks at a high level, and he can be condescending to people who aren't operating at that level. But then you get somebody like Alexis Cowan, and she's like, look, let me explain what Jack Kruse is trying to say. Like, he's surrounded by interpreters, Max Gulhane, other people who say, I'm going to put this in a different way that's a little bit more relatable. And then someone says, okay, I'll give it a shot. I'll go into the Morosco. I'll do a little cold. I'll lay out in the sunshine. And then they'll send me a message that says, Professor Seager, I have the most gorgeous tan. Like, I look like I'm in the best shape of my life. Well, your skin is, because you're finally doing it the way that your body was designed to do it, by giving it the right stimulus that all of medicine told you was wrong. And medicine was harming you. Right now, iatrogenic injury, so this is medical errors or the harm of some kind of medical care, depending upon the source that you cite, is either the number one killer in the United States or it's number 3.
Yep.
Either way, it's right up there with heart disease as a leading cause of death.
Yeah. That's insane, right? Like, it's absolutely insane. Yeah, to your point, Jack's beat me up numerous times, right? Like, I get it. I get people that have disdain for him, but like, I just revere the man. He's changed my life. But um, you know, uh, I have found it challenging to get uh, deeper in my understanding in some areas with a lack of guests that go down the rabbit trails, right? So, like, for two that I'm really excited about, and one, this I'm tying this all back together. Like, it's why I appreciate you so much, and why this conversation I feel like is crucial. Martin Picard, he retweeted something that you put out, right? And I think he's brilliant. So, like, he's coming on after he gets the book published, and we're going to take a deep dive into the mitochondria. So, like, that is really, really exciting. Some of the stuff Michael Levin's doing. I've got T. Owen Moore, who's been researching melanin for 30 plus years, right? Like, this is some really important stuff to bring in the biophysics and the magnetochemistry. I think those two aspects and how they relate to biology are going to be where the groundbreaking is. So, like, uh, this is what we've got to fund. This is what we have to support. This is what we have to talk about, because that, in my opinion, is where we're going to get these breakthroughs.
Yep. We got Marty Makary, if I'm sending that right. He's now in charge of the FDA. And he was a guy at Johns Hopkins who opposed the lockdowns for good reasons, just like Jay did, just like I did, just like a lot of other like people who are driven by data do instead of driven by ideology. I'm reading Marty's book, Blind Spots. Marty turned himself into a journalist. He's a physician and he's in the operating room and he's a faculty member, but he turned himself into a journalist. He went out there and he's talking to parents and he's talking to other physicians about the things that you're not allowed to question in medicine. I just got through the part where he says the American Pediatric Association was telling the pediatricians not to give your infant or toddler peanuts because anaphylactic shock and peanut allergies is all out of control. So avoid giving them peanuts. You know how to create a peanut allergy in a child? You avoid
Don't
giving
give
them
them peanuts.
So Marty lays it out. The data is exactly the opposite. Give them peanuts. Do it, mix it up with some water or something, but do it at a very young age when their immune system is developing, so that their immune system responds to the peanuts in a healthy way instead of a disordered sort of allergic autoimmune way. His book is full of medical mythology that is overturned by data. And yet there's good reasons why people no longer trust these medical institutions.
Yeah,
They are not
absolutely.
organized around the patient's best interest. And there's good reasons for that. If you are a publicly traded corporation, you have a legal obligation as an executive to manage your company to maximize shareholder value. You don't have a choice. This is a Supreme Court decision that goes back to like the original days of the auto industry when the Dodge brothers were suing Ford or something like this. And the Supreme Court said that the executives of the publicly traded corporation have a legal obligation to manage the company to maximize shareholder value. So if an executive at Pfizer or Moderna or some HMO, United Healthcare, whatever it is, if an executive is faced with the choice of patient well-being versus shareholder value, they must choose shareholder value or they're breaking the law. And I don't think people realize the incentive structure that these institutions of supposedly both government and private of public health are operating under, but they're waking up to the idea that it is not in the patient's best interest. And that means you're on your own. You
Yeah.
want to make America healthy again? Make yourself healthy again. Because
Yeah.
there's no way that we're going to become healthy as a country if
Yeah.
we leave it up to Kennedy or we leave it up to Bhattacharya or we are leaving it up to any of the government institutions. We are
It's on us.
responsible for our own health. That's correct.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of
Absolutely.
goddamn work. And sometimes it takes a crisis like you experienced or like I experienced with a child. If it were me, I wouldn't know half the stuff. If I could have changed places with my son and said, hey, give me the diabetes, I'd
Yeah.
probably still be eating glazed donuts
Yeah.
because it's the motivation that a father feels for his child that will
Yeah.
make him depart from the conventional wisdom, make him take the chances that people are going to make fun of him. What is so important to you that you're willing to risk public humiliation to do it? And the answer is the
Love.
well-being of my child.
Yeah. Your love for our
Yeah,
child. That, I mean,
that's
that was the title
exactly
of my book, right? Like at Father's Heart. That's what I agree wholeheartedly with you. So we're gonna do a Rumble only part here at 45 minutes because it's a really important conversation, and YouTube's gonna tank it. They hate me anyways.
Yep.
So this is what we're seeing. I am in the cancer world. That's my whole world, and we are seeing turbo cancers like crazy. It's absolutely insane. So if we look at like what Kevin McKernan has done, and he found the SV40 promoter in the Pfizer, Buckholtz confirmed that, and now labs all over the world have confirmed it. That's not conspiracy theory anymore. That we can get censored. They found SV40 promoters in the Pfizer, and we are seeing everybody that has come to us with cancer received at least one Pfizer. The ones that we're finding with these turbo cancers where they're presenting at stage 4, right? Like I just got a text this morning that one lady's out, 42 years old, 5 kids, corporate America job, all that good stuff. Nothing stage 4 cancer, just had a softball sized tumor removed from her colon. Okay. So like it's everywhere. And that is, Tom, that's one of I don't know, maybe 20 in the last 2 weeks. People
Yeah.
like it's everywhere, and I think we're just scratching the surface. So my
Yeah.
reason for going through all that was in looking at some sort of a solution for SV40. It has to be photobiomodulation. Like that has to be what part of the solution is. With that, it's coupled with cold therapy. So
Mhm.
this is the key, right? And so like all of the protocols that we are trying to work through and get, we got unbelievably brilliant minds working on this. It's photobiomodulation, it's sunlight, and it's cold. So have you seen absolutely anything on cold and maybe viral expression at all, anything there, and just the cancer in general? This is something that we've got to get people understanding. If you have cancer, the sunlight and cold have got to be a part of it. And that trumps nutrition, in my opinion. The nutrition's super easy: local, seasonal, natural food, and whatever, right? Like
Yep.
that's carnivore part of the time. That's keto
Yep.
part of the time. It's a cycle. But have you seen anything on that?
Not on viral load. That's not my area of expertise. But cancer, I've learned a lot about. And I read Thomas Seyfried's book, Cancer is a metabolic disease. The book's a little outdated now, but it's a great introduction. Travis Christofferson is another one. Ketones, the Fourth Fuel. Another great book if you want to get an introduction into the metabolic theory of cancer. Seafried has become more active on social media. That tumor, that softball-sized tumor, it needs a lot of special conditions to grow. Like everything has to happen just right. First, you got to shut the immune system down because the immune system would recognize these cells and kill them. Okay, so immune system is already under some aberrant condition. Second thing, for that tumor to grow at that pace, it needs energy. It's got to grab the metabolic substrates to fuel that growth. Seafried says there are two, glucose and glutamine, and that's it. Cancer cells, tumor cells, any tumor, it already has defective mitochondria. If the mitochondria were working properly, then you wouldn't have this aberrant genetic condition inside the nucleus that is a cancer cell. Cancer cells are powered by fermentation, not by respiration. And they ferment two things, glucose and glutamine. So Seafried says, we know what fuels cancer and we can starve it. How do you do that? You got to get the glucose out of the tumor cell. There was a team in Sweden. This paper is written by Secchi et al. And they said, all right, we're going to take a closer look at this. Seafried's really into ketones, but we're going to look at cold. They took mice and put them in 4 degrees centigrade air just for 4 hours. So, this is not the same as cold water immersion, but it was cold enough to activate the brown fat in the mice. And remember that these mice have tumors implanted in them. Their whole purpose as a lab mouse is to die of
Do you
cancer.
know how they do that?
They
SV40.
extracted, I forget what kind of tumor tissue it is, but they extracted it and then they implanted it in like the back of the mice. What do you
It's
know?
SV40. It's SV40. That's why all of
That's how
that.
they
That's how you
create.
deduce cancer, and that's what they just gave. So that's the Cutter incident, right? That's what happened with polio. Jonas Salk's
Wow.
vaccine. They gave 3 million doses of cancer-causing virus to people. This is why we had
Wow.
the explosion in the 70s, and now we're seeing that SV40 promoter, right? Like, so not to cut you off, but that's why I'm saying out of the gate when I
No,
said
it's a great
SV40,
point. The
it's huge.
chemical that induces cancer in a laboratory animal is also being administered to human beings? That's crazy talk.
It is a virus derived from the green rhesus monkey that they cultivated on the kidneys, right? When they were cultivating the polio virus, they did it on a monkey kidney that was
Yep.
contaminated with simian virus number 40, and it
Yep.
causes cancer in all mammals. And so they took part of that, the promoter, to get it into
Yep.
the nucleus for the
Yep.
mRNA technology. I refuse to call it a
Yep.
vaccine. The mRNA technology. That's the problem.
Yep.
And it wasn't disclosed. But now it's been proven through Buckholtz, McKernan, and labs across the world.
And so this is no surprise. These turbo cancers that we're seeing,
No.
it's terrible. What happened in this Swedish study is they compared the mice that got cold to the mice that were kept under thermoneutral conditions. They found that the brown fat inside the cold activated or the cold mice was activated, that it preferentially sucked the glucose, cleared the glucose out of the bloodstream, starving the tumor cells. That's why the tumor cells grew more slowly and the mice that got cold lived longer. Then they recreated the effect in a human Hodgkin's patient, just to show that the brown fat is still active in the human being and that the same preferential uptake of glucose exists. This is an incredible paper. It should be, like you say, setting off, alarm bells all over the internet where oncologists are saying, okay, there are no adverse side effects to incorporating some cold plunge therapy or some deliberate cold exposure into your practice. There's some data that says it will relieve some of the side effects of chemotherapy or radiation and help you recover faster. And there's some good metabolic benefits. Let's get you in the cold and let's see what happens. But it's as if everyone has ignored this. Cancer patients are now sending me their PET. So this is positron emission tomography that is used to image the tumors. Brown fat will also show up on that. This is
Yep.
how brown fat in adults was discovered. And they say, look, I've got my cancer. I'm shrinking my tumor. Look at what showed up on my PET, the brown fat that is from the cold that I've been doing. Do you think this is helping? Well, I don't know. Like, I'm not a medical doctor. What I know is it's not hurting. They feel great. Their tumors are shrinking. It doesn't cost them a lot to do it. So keep that up. That's another N=1 experiment. When are we going to have the clinical trial that says, all right, in human beings with cancer, we're going to incorporate some cold exposure and we're going to compare that controls for people who haven't. I've got Dean Hall, who swam the entire length of the Willamette River and went in and out of hypothermia for 3 straight weeks and cured his chronic leukemia.
Yep.
I've got a
Yep.
friend, it's the same one with the green light. She had a tumor on her liver. They told her it was inoperable, untreatable. So she went with a keto diet and ice baths. She shrunk that tumor. So when are we going to say all these one-off miracles create new hypotheses that are deserving of clinical trials? How about
Well,
now?
I think even if I mean we should have it right, but we can't control that either, right? It goes back to get healthy, have these conversations. All the things that you just mentioned go straight back to that light metabolism, right? So like we know
Agree.
from Gerwich's onion root experiment that biophotons, especially in the UV range, stimulate mitosis, right? Like we know that it's that's proven. We also know that with metastasis, it only happens. So that's diaphoresis. You talked a lot about the immune cell and how they move throughout the body. That happens without UV. So what we're doing, and when you look at actually like chemotherapy and stuff, is we're doing the exact opposite that needs to be happening. We're creating metastasis in the way
Correct.
that we are going after it. And I think that another one of the lattice work of mental models I want to throw in here is that deuterium piece, right? So deuterium, which is an isotope of hydrogen, right? It has a neutron and a proton, whereas hydrogen's only a proton. Is if it is squeezed, and you will probably know this maybe even better than me from the engineer standpoint. If it is squeezed, deuterium is squeezed electrically or magnetically, it produces UV light. We know this through deuterium lamps. It's a UV light. And so what does that do? It stimulates excessive mitosis, right? So we have this whole other component with the deuterium piece, and that so when we have these protocols that we're trying to lay out to get people to go it's got to be the deuterium. It has to be the sunlight. It has to be the magnetism. You hit on grounding earlier. It has to be the cold therapy. And we have to figure out these photobiomodulation materials to help with the SV40 because that is a huge, huge, huge problem. And we're still seeing cancers from that, from the polio vaccines, right? So mesothelioma,
Yep.
brain cancers, lymphoma, all of those are Artie Garzda, Dr. Garzda, he laid all this out. Like all of this can be fact checked, fact check the country boy in Arkansas. So this is a big deal, and the cold therapy has like this is why what you're doing every time you make a post from Roscoe Forge is so important because it is part of the light story, whether you're talking about it that way or not.
Yep. Well, keep translating it for people because I'm talking about the cold and I'm talking about the ice baths and the brown fat and the metabolism. I'm just waking up to the direct relationship between cold exposure and biophotons. And I need to learn more about what's happening inside the mitochondria. Where does that light go? People are skeptical because they're like, well, I put a spectrophotometer on a human body while it was cold and I didn't measure anything. Did
Yeah.
you think that light was going to escape from inside the body out of like we're using that
Alexis
light long before
had
it reaches
Jack
us?
and Scott
Yeah.
Zimmerman on recently, and it was brilliant because Scott's a good dude, by the way. Love him. He's an optics engineer. Um, Talking about what he really didn't believe or see evidence of biophotons, right? And so Jack goes through of how you do really good podcast, and that's on Alexis's. So until we have a photo multiplier, we're not going to see it, right? We don't have the technology to know what
Right.
we don't know yet.
Yep. And just because we're not measuring it doesn't mean it isn't there. you know, we have
Absolutely.
in the physical sciences what I call a material fetish. It's kind of a lack of imagination. We only think that what our instruments can detect is real. If our instruments can't see it or amplify it for us, then it must not exist. What a failure of imagination it is, to be stuck in that section of engineering or physics right now.
Absolutely. We learned this on the ambulance, right? You treat your patient, not your
Yeah.
information you're getting, right? Like
Yep.
if they have a oxygen saturation of 99% and they're purple, are we going to treat the patient? Or are we going to treat the pulse ox, right?
Right,
Like maybe we have
right,
carbon monoxide poisoning, right? Like maybe
right.
something else is going on. So it's to your point. And one other thing about I'm so tired of hearing about was show me the study. Did they have studies ancestrally speaking on what plant not to eat because it's going to kill you? Well, no. They learned by eating it and dying. And they're like, hey, Bob ate that, don't eat this one, right? And so it's just crazy to me how we go about all of this.
Science is a
All of
great way to structure, organize, and create knowledge. It's not the only way. And so this is part of what's changed in my career. I'd even say science, as powerful as it is the minority way of creating, structuring, and organizing knowledge. I mean, it's great, but human beings, we're not wired for science. We're wired for story. And if you've got some reliable new nugget of knowledge, a graph isn't going to be what really changed the mind. The graph
right.
has to be embedded in a story. Stories have to have characters. Those characters have to have, face like moral quandaries or existential crises. We've been telling stories around the campfire for 250,000 years,
Yeah.
probably the healthiest thing we ever could have done. And now we're going to replace that with an equation or something like,
Yeah.
and I love these. I love the models that we have. They just don't teach anybody anything. Until it's reduced to a story, people can't make sense of it. So I think it was an anthropologist from Harvard, Joe Henrich. He said 80% of what we learn is by imitating prestigious models. The other 20% comes from like studying and reading and doing your homework and things like that.
Fascinating. I love it. I love
Yeah.
it. Thank you so much for the time yet again. I
Thanks for
thoroughly
this
enjoyed it.
invitation. Oh,
Uh,
I learn a lot every time I talk to you.
well, we're all in this together, and I'm just excited. The work you're doing is massive. Don't know if it wasn't for the prompting of Jack and then you, I ever would have done cold therapy. Nor would I have implemented it for the family. And so, thank you. Like what you're doing matters,
I'm
brother.
glad you're doing it.
Appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. I'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, bud.